Well, welcome back, everyone. This is the RecPoker Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, filling in for Jim Reed. You're stuck with me for one more week in the Forums edition. Jim will be back next episode to take over the reins. As always, we are sponsored by the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and this is our Forums edition. So you are joining us to talk about strategy. What are the things kind of on your mind as you're going to the tables, taking out each other's chips, and trying to get better as we go. And tonight we have a post by relatively new member to Rec Poker, goes by the name OutFocusMetal, and we'll talk about that hand in just a second. But before we jump into that, the Rec Poker is nothing without our RECing Crew members, and I'm joined by a few of them tonight. RECing Crew, why don't you introduce yourselves before we get into this post?
Hi, I'm Keith Brandt, and that's Monkey System everywhere.
I'm Kim Kilroy, Fergie56 in the home game, PetVet_33 on Twitter.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50, just about everywhere.
All right, and tonight we've got a pretty interesting hand, a pretty interesting spot for our OutFocusMetal poster. They write, this is a wild hand from a $5 mini marathon played on Stars. So they had 1,000 runners, and they're down to the last 200 with 188 paid. So we're 12 away from the money. We've outlasted 800 other players, and we've just kind of got a crossover into the finish line here. Blinds are 750, 1,500 with a 150 ante, and we have 65K in our stack, which is a fairly healthy stack, especially as we're kind of approaching this bubble. It's one that we might be able to apply some pressure with. And the main villain in this hand, playing from the under the gun one position, or I believe what Eric Jin would call EP, has 33K. So they're probably got a stack that's going to survive this bubble, especially with this many players, but they're getting a little bit lower, and they're definitely feeling some ICM pressure. And I think we're going to talk about whether they are feeling ICM pressure or not. They should be, but sometimes players who aren't, or who should be feeling ICM pressure, may not be. And we've got to adjust to those kinds of players as well. So that might come up in this hand. But our OutFocusMetal writes, the table is playing fairly passive. Hero has opened their range a little and is targeting the mid stacks as the bubble is close. No proper reads on the villain other than they've been tricky, e.g. check raising or limp, 4-bet shove pre, but my memory isn't so great, so that might be wrong. Well, fair enough. This is why I hope you have something like a poker tracker or something, so you can actually go back and review these spots, because our memories will play tricks on us. Further, OutFocusMetal writes, there were a number of very passive players at the table, so no real strong reason to go after the big stacks with speculative hands. So before we get into this actual hand, anyone want to comment on this dynamic that's been laid out? 200 left, 188 get paid. We're sitting there with a pretty healthy stack. Thoughts about your approach in this kind of situation?
I think at this buy-in level, I'm not going to give my opponents a lot of credit for being ICM aware, because I've been in many tournaments, even much bigger than that, where the people play the same as they would at the beginning of the tournament or in the mid stages of a tournament. So I think giving people credit for being ICM aware is not going to help you more than it's going to hurt you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would say that may be true, but I find or when I was playing on PokerStars, that people were generally better players, especially when you got down in these large field $5 tournaments closer to the money. We've weeded out all the bad players. We've got good, fairly decent players left. A lot of them are grinding these $5 games, and a lot of them, maybe not all of them, are ICM aware. In my experience with playing in those fields, I would like say the $5 on PokerStars is more like the $150 live tournaments. The thing.
And one of the differences I often think about too, in terms of ICM, like ICM is a thing. It's most significant as we're approaching right now, like the bubble and approaching a final table. And one thing I think that is different about players who, even if whether they're ICM aware or not, most players, even if they don't even know what ICM means, they know what a bubble is, right? They know what the bubble is, and they know as the bubble approaches, I'm going to get a little bit tighter if I'm shorter, because I'm going to try to survive. I'm going to try to get past this bubble. They might not be aware that what they're doing is actually shifting their game due to ICM pressure, all that kind of stuff, but they are aware that I'm going to change my strategy a little. So there is that sort of thing that's going on. Okay, so in that context, this under the gun one player opens to just above a min open. In this, it's 750, 1500 from a stack of about 32,000. They opened to 3150, and it folds to us in the cutoff, and we are holding the ace of clubs and the 7 of clubs in the cutoff, with 3 players behind us, 2 of which cover us. Both blinds cover us. We obviously cover the player who's just opened. Okay, we're approaching this bubble. We've got position on this opener. What are your thoughts with a hand like A7 of clubs?
I personally find that when an early position player with only 22 big blinds opens, they're probably very strong. They're not going to be opening light in this sort of situation, as far as I'm concerned, especially when they're opening into the biggest stacks at the table are in the blinds. So it's like a suicide run if they're opening light. Mm-hmm. So I would probably just be throwing anything less than maybe ace 10 suited. I would play anything less than that. I would be throwing in the muck. Mm-hmm. An ace queen offsuit. So other than that, I would be throwing this away.
Yeah. I like that personally as my preference. I think my and this might seem counterintuitive, because like this might be, if this is just the beginning of a tournament, we're just playing chip EV, I might flat here, a decent amount with this holding. But actually my second choice here is a 3-bet. I like a 3-bet here because we're going to lock out the stacks, or if they come over the top, it's just an easy fold. But we're going to lock out those stacks, those players in the blinds from coming along, and we put an enormous amount of pressure back on the original opener. So I think I like a fold first, I like a 3-bet second, and I like a call last in this scenario.
Yeah, I don't disagree about the 3-bet. I like that idea as well. The problem here is when we 3-bet, we're priced in to call the shove from 22 big blinds.
Oh, I see. Against the original opener, you're talking,
yes.
not against the other. Okay.
No,
okay.
Against the original opener. Yeah.
Right.
And then the other factor here is a call in this situation with this holding is it's speculative. It's you're playing for implied odds here, and villain stack does not support the implied odds that you're playing for. That's another argument against the call here.
Yep. Yeah, so I think this is one that actually this is one where we're getting towards the bubble, and it's one of the things I think that players often can get a little twisted, and it's confusing, right? Because it's like, oh, well, I have a bigger stack than the player that opened, so I get to play more hands. I get to be more aggressive against them. I get to bully them more often. And that's true to a certain extent, but we still have to pick our spots very carefully in this situation, particularly because at this table, there's a number of stacks that are either equal to ours or cover ours. So even though we can apply enormous pressure to them, there's a lot of pressure that can be applied to us. And in fact, I think when we call this, maybe not in this tournament, but there should be a decent number of squeezes that happen in this. Is if we start flatting hands like A7 suited, we should be expected against better players. We should be expected to get squeezed a lot in this spot, and we can never really call those squeezes with this kind of holding. So that's another reason why flatting here is a little bit rough. But our correspondent does elect to flat. And so we go to a flop. We do get folds behind us, which is great, because one of the terrifying things about flatting in this situation is that it really does invite a lot of players to the party. But we do end up going heads up. This is an ideal situation. We're now in position against a player that we cover. And the flop comes king of spades, 5 of clubs, deuce of diamonds. We again are holding ace 7 of clubs. And our villain checks to us. Thoughts about your approach here?
I think if we're going to try to win this hand, this is a place to do it. Right here. By checking, we're showing weakness. I mean, the opener has already shown weakness out of position by checking. Now, when we check behind, we're showing the same thing. We're showing, well, this flop didn't hit us. He's saying the flop didn't hit me. Now we're saying the flop didn't hit us. So right away, we're putting ourselves in a position where we're saying we don't really have a hand. So if I'm going to play this hand in this manner, I think it calls for a bet here. Probably, a small bet, maybe a third of a pot type bet at this point. Even though we were not the pre-flop aggressor, the pre-flop aggressor chose to check. So we can now take over. It's not a donk bet anymore. We can now take over the aggression.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think this is one where I would really want a small bet, and I would probably think of this. I would probably rarely have called here, right? Like I was describing. But if I was calling with all my A7s, I think the one I would check back is the hearts variety here, simply because it's sort of like, and reminder, the flop is a rainbow flop with the diamond, spade, and a club on it, deuce, king, 5. One of the reasons I think continuing here, number one, is we're closing out our player, putting an enormous pressure on them. Even small bets in this situation, when we're on the bubble, we can represent this king very well, but we also have 2 back doors toward a straight and towards a flush, a nut flush, with any of the other holdings besides hearts. So even though we have not really flopped that great here, we still have ace high. And even if we're behind, which is quite likely, by the way, like we're behind by a lot of ace X here. If our opponent, as Kim was describing, is opening strong, they probably have some pairs that are under the king, and they probably have a lot of ace X in their range. And so we're behind a lot, but we can catch up more significantly with a hand like the ones I'm describing. So I like a small bet here a lot. I think this is the spot in the hand where we can just get a lot of those better ace X to fold. And maybe I don't know.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that while we have so many back doors and so many cards that can be good for us on the turn when we'll get to barrel again, that this is the spot in the hand where we want to make a play for this pot.
Yep.
And for planning ahead, if seat 6 there does call our bet, we're almost done with it unless we, even if it turns an ace, we could be out kicked easily. And we're practically done with it. If it turns a club, we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm pretty much, yeah, I agree. Like if we get called, unless the turn is like the 3 or the 4 of clubs, then we might get a little spicy with it. But otherwise, yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah, and I think it's the bet fold bucket. So if you do bet this flop and he chooses to raise into us, do a check raise, then it's an easy fold.
Yep. But our correspondent elects to check back, which, it's not that strong of a holding. I understand maybe saying maybe my ace high is good. I can beat maybe an opening, like, there aren't that many things that our opponent is going to have opened, I think, in this spot that we're actually ahead of with our ace high, but maybe there's like a queen jack suited in there. Maybe there's a jack 10 suited in there. So the turn comes with the 10 of diamonds. So now we have 2 diamonds on the board. The board is now 2 of diamonds, king of spades, 5 of clubs, 10 of diamonds. And our opponent now leads out with a very small bet, about a quarter pot size bet, maybe 30% pot size bet, into about a 10K pot. And it is on us. And let me tell you what our correspondent does, and we can talk about what we do next. Our correspondent elects to raise in this spot. They raise about 4x to about 10.5K, thinking perhaps that initial check showed a lot of weakness, and now they're just taking a stab to try to win the pot, I think, is probably what's going on here. Thoughts on this spot, thoughts on how you would approach this and where we go from here, what you think of either this raise. Are you folding to this small bet? Are you calling it? Are you raising it? What are you thinking?
Well, I personally am probably folding to this small bet. I mean, we've shown weakness. The 10 of diamonds helps us not at all. We have no more of our backdoor draws are in play anymore. All we have is an ace, and like somebody already mentioned, if we do get an ace, we're probably going to be out kicked. So at this point in time, we have no hand whatsoever. I don't know what hand we're representing with the 10.
That's the other problem, right? I think that's the bigger problem for me.
I mean, are we representing that we have 2 big diamonds, maybe? Are we representing that we now picked up a flush draw? I don't know that that's really, I think even if I had picked up a flush draw, I think a call would be more in play. And just one more small nitpicking item. He mentioned that the under the gun +1 raises to 27-22. And that's actually a bet. It's not, because no one has bet on the turn yet. So you can't raise until you've made a bet. So just for clarification purposes, for the next time we post, we should say the under gun 1 bets 27-72. Just to be nitpicky. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And so, yeah, I mean, I think to me, what we're representing is pocket 10s exactly. And I maybe that I don't know that we have a lot of raises here. Like, even if I have pocket 10s, I might want to like see if this player is going to bet the river. I've got position. Maybe I've got queen jack of diamonds. Maybe that's an interesting raise. But if I've only got that, should I even be raising with that? I just don't know that we have that many raises here after we check the flop. And that's one of the things that makes this raise, I think, a particularly challenging one to get through, really.
And the fact that we don't have hardly any raises here means that we have hardly any bluffs. We got even less bluffs.
Right.
Despite the sizing here, we still got a lot less bluffs than raises, which are very scarce here to begin with.
Yeah.
So
and one of the things I think that this speaks to for me is when we're thinking about these moments. Now, number one, ICM should sort of like play into this. And I think sometimes there is this sort of like notion, I think, with ICM that I get to apply a lot of pressure here. And I think some people that internalize that into, I get to raise with nonsense here. And I think we still need to be really cognizant of like how we're approaching these spots, and not necessarily it gives you it does give you some permission to attack a shorter stack with bluffs, but they still have to be carefully constructed bluffs. And this feels like a spot that is a tough one to come up with too many bluffing hand. I guess there's like does ace 4 and ace 3 of diamonds, are those good bluffs here? Is maybe ace 5 of diamonds is an interesting bluff here. I don't know. There just aren't that many bluffs in our range.
So if there's no bluffs, what are our value hands here? Is it king 10? And does king 10 call pre-flop? It would have to be like king 10 of clubs or king 10 of diamonds, maybe. You know, you might call with or king 10 of hearts. Yeah. So we have king 10. We have pocket tens. What else do we have as value that we didn't bet on the flop? Kings, pocket kings. But pocket kings would probably 3-bet
Probably,
pre-flop, wouldn't
right?
it? Right.
I mean, unless and the only reason we wouldn't is like we're really thinking we're going to get squeezed a lot, right? And we want to trap, but I don't really love trapping in these bubble spots anyway, because I think you can just I love trapping in certain situations, but I like to just play pretty clean in these kind of like spots. So
right. So the fact that we have very few value hands, like Keith already mentioned, means we have almost zero bluffs in our range. So
yeah, and it means that I think we're in the kind of the value that we're talking about we have is not value that we're really raising with, right? Like we might have like Jack 10 suited, Queen 10
I would
suited.
give like Queen Jack of diamonds would be like one of the only hands that I would raise this turn with as a bluff.
Yeah, agreed. I think that is probably like the most common one that I would do. I think I would raise maybe with pocket tens, maybe, and Queen Jack suited or Queen Jack of diamonds. But yeah, so I think that makes this raise really hard to get through. And our opponent does call the raise.
One other point that I wanted to add here is that you got to think about what you're leaving behind. Also, he's leaving behind 32 or 34 big blinds. That's one of the least profitable stack depths in Texas Hold'em. You don't want to be in that stack depth range, upper 20s, lower 30s.
Right.
You either don't take the risk to get down there if it's not really warranted, or you fight to get out of it once you get in it. You just don't want to risk being put into that zone.
Yep.
I mean, you're going to find yourself in that zone, but why put yourself in that zone on purpose like this?
Yeah, and one of the other things that this does when our opponent calls this, they leave themselves with there's 30,000 in the middle and they have 19,000 behind, which is about 12 to 13 big blinds. So they're really quite committed to this spot. And they so the river comes and it is a 6 of spades. So the final board is 2 of diamonds, king of spades, 5 of clubs, 10 of diamonds, 6 of spades. And our opponent checks to us having about 12, 13 big blinds behind, it's almost a half SPR, a little bit more than, they have a little bit more than half pot behind. It is on us. We are sitting here with ace 7 of clubs. Do we want to continue this story? And if so, what do we do?
So I know that our opponent bets, our hero bets here. But I think it's a really good spot to bet. But I think you have to put the opponent all in. Like, there's just no other bet that can be done here.
Yep.
It has to be an all-in
Agreed.
bet. It has to be for all their chips.
Yep.
And it has to be meaningful. And that would be with our bluffs and with our value.
Yes. Yep. And our course,
So-
so yes, and you're sort of alluding to this because, like, and why? Why? Let's say what our and then let's talk about why. So our correspondent bets 7,500 into a pot of 30,000, which now are which is about, you know, 40% of our opponent's stack, but it leaves them 7 or 8 big blinds behind. So, and they end up getting called, but let's talk about why we want to jam here.
Well, when our opponent checks to us on the river, to me, I read this as a medium strength made hand.
Mhm.
Like a medium strength hand, they just want to show it down. So I think we can get them off of this hand with a shove. And because we've taken this route with our hand, we've taken the actions that we have with it. The shove makes sense here because we've raised on the turn and now we can shove this river. So when we've made the raise on the turn, I think this makes this a pretty easy shove with all of our hands that we're at this river with, all of them. And especially when a blank comes here.
Yep. And particularly because of the bubble, right? We
Yeah.
are threatening not only their tournament life, but we are threatening them as they approach the bubble, and they can still fold their 12 big, fold right here with their 12 big blind stack and probably, cockroach their way into making the money. And we want to threaten that rather than give them the option of like, oh, well, I've got that marginal hand. Let's see. Because we're giving them an amazing price when we bet so small here.
So I have to say, I really like our correspondent's instinct to bet here. I really, really like it when they find themselves on the river on this spot and they get checked to on the river. And we just have to work on our sizing.
Yep.
On a board this uncoordinated with the action that we've seen so far, I don't think our opponent has a king.
Mm-hmm.
We possibly have a king with maybe a mediocre kicker or something. We go all in and he's going to have to fold his ace queen. Yep. I mean, because up till now you can call down with an ace high. With this uncoordinated of a board where you can almost take kings out.
Well, I think he has to fold his 8s, his 9s, maybe even some 10s.
I think 10s.
I think he has to fold a lot of stuff.
Yeah, if we go all in. But with the small bet, he can call with ace queen.
Right. And I think that's because it's a spoiler alert, but the villain does call and has ace queen of diamonds. So they turned both a gut shot to the straight and a diamond draw, then found themselves on this river. And I think they rightly, even though they're in this ICM spot, there's so much chips in the middle here, and we can have bluffs. We can have bluffs that ace queen beats. And because we didn't put that ultimate pressure on them, they were able to find that call. I think that they fold to a jam with this spot. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe they're like, this is a good hand, and they're frustrated they didn't hit their flush and they call anyway. I have seen that happen too, and I get surprised
Yeah.
in those spots.
When
But
we
yeah.
jam here, we're only jamming 19,000 into 30,000. So we only have to get a fold a certain percentage of the time, and we're definitely going to get it way more than that percentage of the time. I can't do these gorilla maths on the go,
Yeah.
but I know that we have the odds there.
No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
What's also funny, just one aside here. If we're bluffing with a diamond draw, the fact that the villain has ace queen of diamonds makes our hand look stronger.
Yeah, it does.
Because we have fewer bluffs. We don't have the ace of diamonds. We don't have the queen of diamonds. So our hand should look even stronger to somebody holding those two cards, because we can't be bluffing with that many flush draws.
Yeah. And this would be like almost one of the automatic, like, just dump, ejection things. But
Mhm.
I think our correspondent, is wondering, I think he writes, please feel free to comment on the questionable play, how readable you feel my line betting is. But I'm really after his insight on how ICM should influence the call from the villain on the river. My bet size was precisely at what I thought left them with no call option, either a shove or a fold. If I've got a good chunk of bluffs in my range, are there any calling hands in villain's range that aren't rendered redundant due to ICM? And I think what potentially we're sort of misreading here is, like, yes, I agree, ICM is a factor here, but this bet sizing actually opens the opportunity for our villain to call. Whereas if you threaten their bubble life and their tournament life, they cannot call with a bluff catcher this week. There's not much difference between them having, I mean, there is a difference, I agree, but there's not much difference between them having 12 big blinds and 8 big blinds here. And we give them that option of finding out if they can win, what is this, 45,000 in the middle? So they can win 30 big blinds, 30 big blinds by calling 4 of them. That might be worth bluff catching a little. And so I think that's where we leave the door open for them to make this call. All right. Any other thoughts on this spot, this hand, this kind of bubble play in general?
I ran this hand through Odin, and
Yeah,
this is not in ICM mode, to
okay.
be fair. And it did fold the ace 7 of clubs on the flop almost all of the time, but 1% of the time it finds that raise that we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And follows the same line with a small bet on the river. And our opponent is supposed to fold ace queen of diamonds.
Yeah. Well, and I think if we were,
but this is not, that's
Chippy
not
V,
ICM. So,
yeah, if we're playing Chippy V, this small bet doesn't actually upset me as much. I think the ICM factor is the one that really means that when we're in these kinds of situations, we have to give our opponents the most difficult decisions we possibly can. Particularly, we have to do it with our value and our bluffs. And I think this is a cardinal example of why that's important.
Absolutely, a great example of that. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank our correspondent for putting themselves out there. We definitely had some things to talk about with this hand. I think it was a really great hand, a really great example. Hopefully something we can all learn from. I want to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for sponsoring us. And I want to thank Keith, Rob, Kim for all your insights. And most of all, I want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. Thanks so much. We couldn't do it without you.